Is a very brief introduction to a very complicated disorder, as you guys all kind of know. Disorders, it involves mostly a loss of contact with reality, and it is also a chronic mental illness that affects 1% of the population. So I know that we kind of throw around these stats, right? Like 1% of the population doesn't seem like that much, but that means that 2.5 million Americans over the age of 18 have had experience with psychosis, which for me is kind of mind-boggling. There are also 51 million individuals worldwide who have experienced psychosis. The age of onset is around 18 to 25. I think it's actually getting later, so the average for women is between 25 and 30. But it's interesting because men and women experience their first episode of psychosis at different ages. So men tend to experience their first episode of psychosis around the age of 18 to 22, so they're much younger. And women experience that around the age of 27 to 25, 27 to 30. What do you think about that difference between men and women would impact functioning later on for that group?
The difference in timing for diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Women might be able to establish more of a career or solid life or relationships or anything like that.
Exactly.
That would be disturbed.
Yeah, so like when you're 18 years old and you experience your first episode of psychosis, you could be taken out of school, you have this new illness that you're trying to get used to, it could really affect the way that you view yourself. But for women, if you're around the age of 30, you've already experienced a lot of your big milestones, like maybe graduating from college, having your first job, being in a romantic relationship. You also may have these other skills like social functioning skills that are intact that men may not have. So you can imagine that the prognosis may be low. A representation of how many people in America are diagnosed with schizophrenia. And here it shows the same scale but for Alzheimer's disease.
I see twice as many, twice as much representation for schizophrenia than Alzheimer's, which is already considered to be one of the large risks that everyone encounters, and schizophrenia is twice as likely.
Yeah, and people don't talk about it, right? Like my grandfather died from complications related to dementia, and I hear people talking about Alzheimer's all the time. And schizophrenia, it's one of those things that, when you do talk about it, it almost feels more hush-hush.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this also points to some, like, sociological differences.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So based on the readings, I'm wondering if you guys can tell me, what are the 3 primary types of symptoms experienced by people with schizophrenia?
If I remember right, it's positive, negative, and cognitive.
Mm-hmm. The other 2 types, great, are positive symptoms, which you kind of can imagine as something that doesn't exist in an otherwise healthy person. So hearing voices is something that you kind of add on for someone with a psychotic disorder. You kind of test positive for it. Negative symptoms, wait, can you tell me an example of what a positive symptom would be?
So positive symptom might be a hallucination.
Yeah, so normal people don't have hallucinations, but people with psychotic disorders, like an add-on, would be having a hallucination. Great. And a negative symptom is kind of like the opposite, right? Like the other side of the coin. So it's something that people with psychotic disorders don't have or have less of that people who don't have a disorder have. Can you come up with an example of?
Social skills or something of that nature that they would develop otherwise.
Exactly. So deficits in social cognition, social functioning, even things like their facial expressions not being as able to express their emotions. So it's called blunted affect. Or anhedonia, where you feel less pleasure or interest in doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So what I'd like you to do is in groups, I want you to discuss different ways to measure symptoms related to psychosis. So the 2 examples I have that I thought would be interesting for you to discuss are hallucinations and blunted affect, or reduced facial expression.
Measuring how severe it is and how much it impacts the functioning of the client, or how severe it is in a way that threatens their safety or anyone else's safety. So if their hallucinations are aggressive or negative or like just dangerous in nature, those would obviously be more severe than a hallucination that is just telling you to shower twice instead of once or something like that.
Right, so you did a really good job of saying, like, for an auditory hallucination, specifically, like, people with this disorder have different voices that they hear. And if you hear a voice telling you to hurt yourself, that would probably be more severe than if you hear a voice telling you to shower twice today. So that's a really good example. The pros and cons of the measure that you developed, like asking someone about, what are what's the content of their voices, how often they're hearing things, what they're hearing, like the audible level of it. What are the pros of that?
Pros would be that in not being able to experience it yourself, you get an insider's view of what is actually going on.
Yeah.
Whereas a con might be that they don't feel comfortable sharing, or they feel judged, or maybe they are experiencing paranoia as part of their symptoms that would not prompt them to freely share.
Yeah, so great. So in one way, asking them about it, you can make them feel more comfortable. You could build more of a therapeutic alliance or rapport with them. They may feel heard even just by experiencing this. But a con of that particular measure is that you may have someone who doesn't feel comfortable telling you things, and you may not get an accurate picture of it. Great. Is have you watch this clip of Ellen Sachs, and afterward I'm going to ask you a little bit about what she experiences, so pay close attention.
On Friday night to work on our memo assignment together, but we didn't get far before I was talking in ways that made no sense. Memos are visitations, I informed them. They make certain points. The point is on your head. Pat used to say that. Have you killed anyone? Rebel and Val looked at me as if they or I had been splashed in the face with cold water. What are you talking about, Ellen? Oh, you know, the usual. Who's what, what's who, heaven and hell. Let's go out on the roof. It's a flat surface. It's safe. Rebel and Val followed, and they asked what had gotten into me. This is surreal me, I announced, waving my arms above my head. And then, late on a Friday night, on the roof of the Yale Law School, I began to sing, and not quietly either. Come to the Florida sunshine bush. Do you want to dance? Are you on drugs, one asked? Are you high? High? Me? No way, no drugs. Come to the Florida sunshine bush, where there are lemons, where they make demons. You're frightening me, one of them said, and Rebel and Val headed back into the library. I shrugged and followed them. Back inside, I asked my classmates if they were having the same experience of words jumping around our cases as I was. I think someone's infiltrated my copies of the cases, I've said. We've got a case to joint. I don't believe in joints, but they do hold your body together. It's an example of loose associations. Eventually, I made my way back to my dorm room. And once they...
So, what did you notice about Dr. Sachs? What kind of symptoms was she disclosing about that are related to schizophrenia?
Lots of positive symptoms of things that she was experiencing that others weren't around her.
Yeah. Can you give an example?
Yeah, like when she was asking about the cases and if words were running around or things like that, and everyone else said, no, what are you talking about? What's gone into you?
Yeah, so it could mean that she's seeing things that other people aren't seeing. Mm-hmm. Or when she was talking about feeling like people are infiltrating her, her cases. What would that be an example of?
Paranoid thinking, or the delusion that the others are out to get her for whatever reason.
Yeah, exactly. So in groups, what I'd like you to do, based off of the readings and what you know about schizophrenia, to fill in the blanks. And this is a competition, so do it as quickly as possible.
1% of Americans are diagnosed with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a chronic mental illness that involves 3 primary types of symptoms, which would be positive, negative, and cognitive. Delusions are an example of a positive symptom of psychosis, in which a person espouses the belief that, despite being presented with evidence against that belief, the most commonly experienced positive symptom is a hallucination, which are false perceptions or internal experiences that lack an external cause/stimulus. Moving on, some people also